I remember vividly Aaron Rubin, our showrunner, coming down and saying, talking to Andy, and then Andy he always called Don Jesse.
Yeah.
Hollywood's golden age may have been glamorous on the surface, but behind the cameras, some of the biggest stars were shockingly ruthless. Ron Howard is spilling the secrets, revealing the 6 most notoriously evil actors of that era. Names you thought were untouchable. Who made the list, and what shocking stories are hiding behind the silver screen? Keep watching, because the truth about Hollywood's darkest legends might just blow your mind. Number 6. Shelley Long. On the surface, Night Shift looked like a straightforward early 80s comedy, a spirited Ron Howard directorial effort with a cast full of rising talent. But behind the scenes, tensions were quietly mounting between Ron and Shelley Long, tensions that crew members described as one of the more combustible dynamics the set ever saw. From the first week of shooting in 1981, Shelley arrived with a relentless attention to detail, what others might call committed professionalism. Some on set considered something else entirely, a near-obsessive perfectionism that rubbed people the wrong way. Scenes that should have been simple setups were stretched into grueling hours of retakes and minute adjustments. While striving for quality can be admirable, the atmosphere on set began to shift as her demands increased. Ron had come from a background of TV and family-oriented productions, where efficiency and camaraderie mattered just as much as performance. By contrast, Shelley approached Night Shift like a meticulous stage actor preparing for a one-woman show. She would request multiple takes of the same dialogue beat, not for comedy timing, but to chase an elusive, perfect version in her head. Each time Ron called "cut," she'd ask for another run, citing tiny emotional inflections or pacing changes that only she seemed to notice. What began as a collaboration grew into a test of patience. Every time Ron tried to rein in the clock, Shelley would push back in the earnest belief that her performance wasn't worthy of compromise. Her approach was a demand that everything meet her standard, no matter how long it took. Tension, once barely noticeable, became a quiet undercurrent. Ron wanted Night Shift to be funny and spontaneous. A few quips here, a bit of improvisation there, but Shelley's insistence on precision seemed to slow the very comic rhythm the director was trying to cultivate. Rather than harmonize with the ensemble's freewheeling energy, she carefully dissected each moment, as if the half-hour between laughs was the true measure of success. There were reports, never confirmed publicly, that at least 2 scripted scenes were restructured on set because Shelley felt the original beats didn't serve the character's emotional truth. What crew members described as strong artistic vision, others saw as inflexible disagreement with Ron's game plan. The two had to negotiate whether a scene stayed on a cut or deserved another round, but those negotiations were anything but smooth. By the time production wrapped, the undercurrent between director and star was worn thin. Both walked away from Night Shift professionally. The film was released to solid box office numbers and helped launch Michael Keaton's big-screen career, but people on set never forgot the strain. That kind of unspoken tension wouldn't be unique. In fact, it leads us to the next name on our list. Number 5. Yul Brynner. From the moment a young Ron Howard first stepped onto a Hollywood set opposite Yul Brynner, there was an undercurrent of tension that simmered far beneath the surface, a conflict that they never publicly acknowledged, but crew members and insiders described as one of the most palpable clashes on set in Hollywood history. Ron was a child actor at the time, cast in The Journey, a sprawling Cold War drama that starred Brynner, already a towering figure in cinema thanks to The King and I and The Ten Commandments. Brynner was known for his intense, commanding presence, both on and off camera. At just 5 years old, Ron found himself in awe of Brynner, and that awe quickly turned into something much more complex. According to behind-the-scenes accounts, Brynner's dominance on set wasn't just about charisma, it verged on tyranny. Veterans described him not simply as a strong personality, but as someone who expected the world to bend to his will. Crew members whispered about how Brynner would insist on absolute control of his scenes, demanding adjustments and asserting his presence in ways that made even seasoned professionals flinch. For the young Ron, who was still learning the ropes of film sets and seasoned actors, navigating Brynner's aura was an early lesson in power dynamics. Where other actors mentored him, Brynner's interactions were curt and unpredictable, a mix of condescension and inscrutable authority. In interviews decades later, Ron's few references to Brynner were polite but distant, almost as if he was careful not to reveal too much about a figure who loomed as large off-camera as on. But beneath the surface politeness, there was friction. Production assistants recalled crew whispers about the look Brynner gave, suggesting impatience with Ron's presence, not because the boy was untalented, but because Brynner saw himself as the singular force on set. There was an unspoken hierarchy, and in Brynner's mind, a child actor wasn't meant to rival the energy he brought to a scene. These subtle power plays mattered, and young Ron noticed them. People on set began to sense that every time the two appeared in the same frame, Brynner, with his shaved head and imperious silhouette, and Ron, small and earnest, there was a clash of worlds. Brynner didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His mere presence was enough pressure. Ron, on the other hand, learned to retreat into quiet observation, but that only fed Brynner's impatience with anything that didn't conform to his idea of filmmaking discipline. The tension was silent, but electric. Over the years, Brynner's reputation for being demanding grew. Clashes with other stars like Steve McQueen on The Magnificent Seven were widely reported, and Brynner himself once claimed he feuded with studios rather than actors. While Brynner denied personal rivalries, his pattern of pushing back against co-stars fueled the myth that intensity was his default mode. For Ron, that early experience became a defining moment. It taught him not just about filmmaking, but about how personalities, especially towering ones like Brynner's, can shape a set's atmosphere. Ron rarely speaks about it today, but those who worked with him later say the lessons he learned negotiating Brynner's powerful presence helped mold his own approach to leadership and collaboration. And yet, that wouldn't be the last time Ron found himself caught in a tense on-set dynamic. Number 4. Henry Winkler. On the surface, Ron Howard and Henry Winkler's time on Happy Days looks like classic TV camaraderie. Ron played the clean-cut Richie Cunningham, the all-American poster boy. Henry was the swaggering, cool guy Fonzie, the leather-jacketed symbol of effortless charm. But behind the scenes, what fans remember as a friendly contrast was, in truth, a long-standing clash of personalities, ambitions, and egos that simmered beneath the laughter and high fives. From the earliest seasons, the tension was there. Richie was the heart of the show, a character audiences trusted and rooted for. Fonzie, by contrast, was the show's pulse, unpredictable, magnetic, and instantaneously iconic. When Henry's Fonz became an unexpected breakout star, it didn't just change the direction of Happy Days, it changed the dynamic between the two leads. Ron was a seasoned child actor by the time Happy Days began, comfortable in front of the camera, and trained to take direction. Henry was new to the business, a gifted performer who relied on instinct and raw charisma. What should have been a complementary blend instead turned into a subtle contest for narrative gravity. Richie was supposed to be the centerpiece, the moral compass. But how could he compete with a character whose very presence seemed to redefine cool? As the show's popularity grew, so did Fonzie's prominence. Storylines shifted, scripts were rewritten, and audiences tuned in not just for the wholesome nostalgia of 1950s Americana, but to see Fonzie's next move, whether he was jumping a shark or wooing hearts with a shrug. Ron, watching from the other side of the set, felt the change. He didn't resent Henry's success, at least not openly, but there was a tension born of professional frustration, the sensation of standing in the spotlight only to see someone else step forward and gleam. Crew members noticed how Ron's posture changed in scenes with Henry due to a mounting sense that the story they had agreed to tell was slipping from his grasp. Henry, for his part, was unaware of much of this. He was warm and easygoing off camera, but there was something in his rise that inevitably altered the balance. Richie was no longer TV's natural nucleus. Fonzie was. And that shift, no matter how well audiences embraced it, created a quiet rivalry that lasted through the show's run. They appeared cool with each other without the glare of a camera. But when the cameras rolled, the contrast between them became a kind of silent duel. One of earnest steadiness versus unruly cool. Of earned tradition versus spontaneous idol. Fans idolized Fonzie's every move. They respected Richie's integrity, but felt drawn to the Fonz. And Ron, who had once been the experienced steady hand, now found himself watching as a fictional character outpaced his own in cultural relevance. Despite this, neither man ever confronted the other directly. Instead, the rivalry manifested in subtle ways. The way Ron approached his scenes, always measured, always careful. The way Henry played his, often improvised, leaning into every opportunity to push Fonzie's swagger one beat further. What audiences saw as chemistry was in part the fire of two performers pushing against each other, each defining his own place in the show's mythology. By the time Happy Days ended, the feud had transformed into something almost respectful, a bittersweet acknowledgement that their careers, so intertwined, had been shaped by the friction between them. They were rivals by circumstance, allies by necessity. And in the decades that followed, both Ron and Henry would speak warmly of one another. But the undercurrent of that early tension, that silent competition born on the soundstage, remained a fascinating chapter in television history. But if that rivalry was subtle, the next one was anything but. Number 3. Russell Crowe. When Ron Howard first cast Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind, it was the collision of two powerful creative forces whose working relationship would become one of the most talked about dynamics of early 21st century filmmaking. From the outside, the collaboration looked smooth. A director with an Oscar-winning vision and an actor delivering one of the most nuanced performances of his career. But behind the scenes, it was far from quiet. Russell had already earned a reputation in Hollywood as a mercurial, intensely driven performer, the kind of actor whose genius could electrify a set, but whose emotional swings could test even the most seasoned directors. Ron Howard himself once described working with Russell as a bit like shooting on a tropical island, beautiful and full of possibility, but prone to sudden storms in the form of mood changes and emotional intensity. Ron wasn't shy about acknowledging that Russell's temperament was powerful. "You know the weather's going to change several times during the course of the day," Ron said, "but you also know it's a beautiful island." A metaphor that captured both admiration and caution. His comment didn't paint Russell as difficult for difficulty's sake, but as someone whose internal fire could quickly flare up and require careful handling. That intensity wasn't limited to fashion or mood. Russell was known to immerse himself completely in every role, pushing emotional and physical boundaries in pursuit of authenticity. On A Beautiful Mind, this meant probing deeply into John Nash's psyche, demanding precision not just in his own performance, but from those around him. Crew members and co-stars recall Russell digging into scene after scene with relentless focus, and Ron had to navigate those pressures while keeping the entire production on course. Despite this, the relationship wasn't just about friction. It was also about mutual respect, a grudging recognition that each man lived on the edge of his craft. Russell himself praised Ron's leadership during A Beautiful Mind, thanking him for creating a space where actors could take risks and explore, and recognizing Ron's humility and skill on stage and off. Still, the dueling energies didn't disappear once the cameras rolled. Russell's emotional depth drove his performance toward brilliance, but it also required Ron's steady hand to channel it into a cohesive film. Ron, aware of Russell's intense investment in the material, often had to manage not just Russell's performance, but the psychological climate of the set itself, smoothing over outbursts, defusing tensions, and keeping everyone aligned with the story's emotional heartbeat. That balancing act would prove familiar, but what happened when Ron faced a collaboration that tested his leadership in an entirely different way? Let's move on to another actor that tested Ron's patience. Number 2. Tom Sizemore. Tom Sizemore was one of those actors who could grab your attention just by being on screen, whether it was Saving Private Ryan, Natural Born Killers, or Heat. He had this raw, intense energy that made him impossible to ignore. But behind the charisma and the incredible performances, his life off camera was far from smooth. In fact, it was a long, sometimes painful unraveling that kept following him, no matter how big the roles he landed. Tom's struggles with addiction were well known. What started with alcohol eventually escalated into drugs, and before long, he was battling serious substance abuse that affected every part of his life. The man who could dominate a scene on film often felt completely out of control of it. He admitted later that his addiction powered a lot of his downfall, and it's easy to see how someone so intense in their craft could also be intense in their self-destruction. His personal life wasn't easy either. There were multiple marriages and relationships that fell apart, often tangled up with the pressures of fame and his substance use. At one point, he had a highly publicized domestic violence conviction which landed him in jail and forced him into rehab. Moments like that, combined with repeated arrests for drug-related issues, kept him in the headlines for all the wrong reasons and made studios wary of working with him. All of this naturally affected his career. Roles that could have propelled him further started to dry up. Instead of starring alongside A-list talent in big-budget films, he found himself in smaller projects or television guest spots. People on set reportedly worried about his reliability. And while Tom always showed dedication when filming, the rumors and legal troubles cast a long shadow over his talent. Even so, Tom tried to fight back. He appeared on reality shows like Celebrity Rehab and Sober House, openly confronting his addiction and trying to take steps toward recovery. He even wrote about his struggles, reflecting on the mistakes he'd made and the isolation that came with addiction. But recovery is rarely a straight path, and setbacks along the way kept him in the public eye for the wrong reasons. Despite all the chaos, Tom's skill as an actor never went away. When he passed away at 61, he left behind a legacy that was as brilliant as it was complicated, but it also makes you wonder, how do such intense personalities shape the people who work with them? Number 1. Frances Bavier. On-screen, Opie and Aunt Bee had a sweet, wholesome bond, but behind the cameras, the dynamic between Frances Bavier and Ron Howard was more complicated. While there's no record of a full-blown feud, subtle tensions lingered throughout filming. Frances was famously reserved, professional, and private. Off-camera jokes and playful camaraderie weren't her style, and Ron Howard, as a young actor, thrived in the opposite environment. Curious, playful, and full of energy, that difference created a polite but noticeable distance. Cast members recalled that Frances kept to herself and rarely joined the usual banter and hijinks shared by Griffith, Don Knotts, and the rest of the cast. Ron later described her as extremely professional and perfect in her role, yet not really part of the boys' off-camera antics. While there was no direct conflict, the ongoing mismatch in style and personality created an undercurrent of unease. Moments like arriving late, quietly avoiding jokes, or sitting apart during breaks added up over time, making the relationship feel a bit strained despite the lack of outright confrontation. The tension extended beyond Ron Howard. Frances Bavier's most documented friction was with Andy Griffith, and it ran deeper. Griffith favored a relaxed, joking, improvisational environment, while Frances's stage-trained, disciplined approach to acting demanded focus and professionalism. That difference sometimes made interactions cold or stiff, rather than warm and collaborative. Some crew members noted that Frances would withdraw if upset or uncomfortable, which sometimes included avoiding Griffith's playful banter or the general energy of the set. The divide wasn't dramatic, but it was persistent, shaping the atmosphere for anyone working closely with both of them. Griffith reportedly resented her presence at times, possibly because Frances had been chosen by producer Sheldon Leonard, not by Griffith himself. Small disagreements, stilted exchanges, or moments of silent tension were enough to create the sense of a quiet feud simmering just beneath the surface. Despite years of cool and sometimes frosty interactions, there was eventual reconciliation. Frances reportedly reached out to Griffith shortly before her death to apologize for being difficult during their time on the show. Griffith confirmed the call on Larry King Live, showing that while the tension lingered for decades, there was closure in the end. Seeing this list, which actor surprises you the most? And which behind-the-scenes drama would you never have guessed? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.